Hey dudes, Trash Boat is back!
Here he is, everybody. It's Trash Boat.
Oh, Trash Boat!
Trash Boat.
Hey, Trash Boat!
Yo, you're in for a treat, so hang on to your seat. Get ready for adventure.
I think by this point, saying this franchise needs no introduction is almost as cliche as actually giving a proper informational spew to the viewers about freaking Mario. So, to respect everyone's time, I'll keep this intro short-ish. While he's been in just about everything a video game character can be in, nothing quite feels more Mario than his classical 2D platforming titles. He didn't quite start his virtual life on the NES, but his side-scrolling trilogy is almost as vintage as you can, that's much better. Look, I respect the NES titles as much as the next guy, but if I'm being completely honest, I don't think I would ever go back and play the actual originals when we have these gorgeous 16-bit remakes via Mario All-Stars. You know, the good one. Not to waste time and go off on a tangent, but it's ironic I say that since, as a kid, I never really liked the All-Stars art style. Nowadays, I mean, I would still choose World's look, but dang son, look at those backgrounds, just absolutely stunning. Wait, what was I talking about? Oh yes, the original Super Mario Bros. Came out and made Nintendo like $1 billion. So they were wisely quick to whip up a sequel in the form of Super Mario Bros. 2. I don't want to be a video game history channel, and I think everyone by now should know the story of what happened with Mario Bros. 2 in the West. Nintendo of America got their hands on the game and were scared that it would be both too hard and too similar compared to the original for Americans to buy it. So they reskinned another game named Yumi Kojo Doki Doki Literature Club with Mario sprites and called it a day. It's really hilarious in retrospect how Nintendo of America thought that we as consumers would be too smart not to buy the same product over and over, year after year. Yikes. Now, non-Japanese gamers did not have to wait too terribly long for a chance to play the actual sequel to the original. It was made available through inclusions on both Super Mario All-Stars for the SNES and Super Mario Bros. Deluxe for the Game Boy Color. Something that blows my mind is that we wouldn't have a legal way to play the original Famicom game until 2007 through the Wii's Virtual Console. That was over 20 years that an original mainline Mario game never saw the light outside of Japan. At least, like I said, we got the updated 16-bit remake through Mario All-Stars, which is where I would assume most people have played it. Now, within the All-Stars collection, Nintendo found themselves in a little bit of a sticky situation. They couldn't just call it Super Mario Bros. 2 since the West technically already had a game with that title, so they came up with Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. In addition to the new title, there's a ribbon on the cover art that states that this game is for super players. Wow, can we just take a moment to admire how cool that is? Like, these are the lost levels that Nintendo dug up from the very depths of their computers. The Mario game that you never got to play and only should be attempted by the most hardcore of gamers. I admit, some of that magic disappears when you have the full context of what went down, but even today, after 30 years since the original Mario Bros. 2 came out, it is still one of the most unique Mario games out there. This is due to one simple factor that completely defines the game. It is hard. This game's entire reputation and legacy feels like it's solely based on the fact that it is quite the challenge to get through, especially compared to every other mainline Mario game. Whereas most of them save their ball-busting challenge until the very end in some sort of special world, Lost Levels says nah and starts pounding away at them balls as early as the first level. Let me not get ahead of myself though, for today I want to examine why exactly this game was initially forbidden outside of Japan, and to see if Nintendo of America made the right call way back in the late 80s. Quick confession time. Before making this video, I had actually never sat down to fully play through either the original Mario Bros. Or the Lost Levels. As a kid, anytime I felt like playing the original, I would most certainly use the warp pipe in 1-2 straight to World 4, and it wouldn't be soon after that I put the game down. Regarding the lost levels, well, I got a couple game overs in the first world and promptly turned it off. Nowadays, after playing through every level across both games, I can say that I was actually surprised at how well these titles hold up. Yeah, the platforming and the level design is pretty basic for the most part, and I'm sure the All-Stars makeover made it all the more enjoyable to play through, but honestly, they're fantastic side-scrollers that any fan of the genre has to play out of respect. Now, back on topic, the difficulty of the lost levels in the broad context of every game out there like Super Meat Boy, Celeste, or even Mario Kazooie ROM hacks kinda makes it look somewhat tame, but coming from Mario 1 to 2, it actually instantly caught me off guard. It is true that I knew from the game's reputation and, well, playing it that it was the end-all be-all to Mario Challenge, but I'm not playing around when I said it came out swinging. In fact, the best way I can demonstrate how crazy the lost levels can be at times is to directly compare the first worlds of both the original and the lost levels. So let's do just that, and by let's, I mean me. A heads up though, I don't want to analyze every single detail across these stages, so I'll just be doing a brief overview and pointing out what interests me the most. Super Mario Bros. 1-1. I would be inclined to think that this is up there with some of the most iconic stages in video game history. I applaud this level for doing an excellent job easing the player into the game and teaching them almost every core aspect that'll be used throughout the entire adventure, as good opening stages should do. These key factors include the enemies, power-ups, and bonuses, among others. I honestly have a lot to say about this level because it's pretty godlike, but to streamline the video more so focused towards the lost levels, I just want to point out how freaking amazing the first set of pipes are at explaining Mario's jumping physics. So, Mario has many different jumping heights relative to how long you hold the button down for. In case this wasn't apparent for any new players after first taking control, these third and fourth pipes are tall enough to where you have to hold the button down all the way for a maximum height jump to get across them. In addition, all four of the pipes are perfectly distanced away from each other to show off Mario's momentum, and how you can get even longer jumps while he's running. You see, crossing these same distances is not possible just from jumping from a standstill. As a result, this concept is probably the most important thing 1-1 has to teach, since the overall game is very momentum based. This is kind of weird to say, but the game is a lot more enjoyable if the player has the confidence in continuously moving forward, which is backed up by how the game's physics work and the level design itself. This will become more apparent in other levels, but 1-1 is such a fantastic introduction. Before we get into the actual levels of the lost levels, I want to quickly talk about the title screen. For such an at times frustrating game, it has one of the most calming title screen themes I've ever heard. It reminds me of the Bramble stages in DKC2 with Sticker Brush Symphony playing in the background, where in case if the level pisses you off too much, there's a nice relaxing song to calm you down. Also, I love this paratroopa. It looks like it's gonna knock into you like, oh my god, no! Well, it never does, actually. Speaking of that paratroopa, right off the bat, they are the first enemy you encounter. Like, dang, I really don't want to over-exaggerate this, but there's a somewhat big gap between a slow grounded Goomba and a relatively fast bouncing Koopa Troopa. I want to know how many people started to play this game, got a game over from this single paratroopa, and quickly turned the SNES off. The game's nice enough to soon start you off with a mushroom for an added layer of protection, but this ain't charity, you gotta work for that shroom. Don't feel too bad because the only other mushroom in this level is right above a bottomless pit. In fact, this game should have been called Super Mario Bros. The Adventures of Little Mario, because while I could be wrong, I swear that the game is a lot more stingy with the power-ups. Speaking about power-ups, nice leadway, I should mention there is a brand new one introduced in this first level, which it looks pretty cool if I do say so myself. The The entire level is littered with these piped piranha plants, so it's immediately established at no point are the pipes a total safe space to catch your breath at, unless you're standing directly on top of it. Now, some may argue that they started off a little too aggressive with throwing a lot of enemy types at you from the get-go, but I think it's fine since, for example, in the piranha plants case, they actually do introduce a tougher red variant starting in World 4. These guys don't care if you're standing beside their pipe or not, they'll come out regardless. You know, I never got that anyways. Like, do the green piranha plants know that Mario is right outside their pipe when he's touching it? Even if he is, why wouldn't they want to come out? Isn't it their job to kill Mario? It's not like he can stomp on them like every other enemy in the game. Anyways, the Lost Levels 1-1 isn't nearly as iconic as the originals, but I think it succeeds in laying down the foundation of what the game is all about.
A harder Super Mario Brothers, apparently.
A common way the game goes about this is using a lot more enemies within a level compared to the originals. It actually got me thinking as to if this is good game design or not. Just plastering a bunch of enemies back to back seems a little sloppy at times. But there are some genuinely good placements, such as this Koopa who's barely coming off of the pipe as he's loaded onto the screen. Good stuff, Koopa, good stuff. I think the concept of tempo in platformers is something to take into consideration when looking at the moving parts within a level. Like I've said, Super Mario Bros. Is a very momentum-based game, so a lot of the moving parts within stages somewhat rely on the player to keep moving. We are given an example of this as soon as we get into 1-2 with this first set of Goombas. If the player speeds ahead with Mario as soon as they can take control, they'll be forced to have an interaction with the Goombas almost immediately. But the added challenge to this scenario are the row of question mark blocks right above where Mario will have to jump to combat these enemies. It should be obvious that if Mario bonks his head with one of these blocks, then he'll be sent downwards to the ground, making it impossible to jump his fullest height underneath the blocks, and as a result making the timing of the jump to either clear the Goombas or squash them just a little bit more tricky. On the flip side, if the player has a slower tempo, they can wait out the two Goombas and easily jump over them with no distractions. I must note that this isn't some crazy design feat, but remember it is only the second level. Because it's early on in the adventure, the game is still introducing new things to the players, such as these previously mentioned piranha plants, which are shown off in a fairly safe area within the level. Overall, with the enemies being in more dangerous spots and larger death pits, 1-2 cranks up the difficulty just a little bit while still respecting that the player may be getting used to the game even by this point. Let me introduce you to the single jump that caused my child self an unnecessary amount of anxiety and anger. All because of that stupid little block. Which, I mean, it's not a hard jump in the slightest, but anywho. 1-2 in the Lost Levels is a fairly straightforward and short stage, but features two sets of platforming that kinda baffled me at first glance. I mean, I'm clearly walking past all of it, but still, let's examine this one piece at a time. First off, in the context of the Lost Levels by itself, this is the introduction of descending platforms. In particular, this very first one is almost near the bottom of the screen. So I could easily see new players getting caught off guard by their descent downwards as soon as you step on them. Just feels like a tiny pinch of beginner trap design to me. If anything, I think the reverse order of the 4 platforms could have made it so if a newbie was caught off guard, they would have more time to react and jump to the next platform that is lower and not higher. Next, you have this onslaught of pipes with piranha plants in them. To be fair, if you take your time, it is actually not nearly as bad as it looks, due to the plants staying in the pipe if you're standing on top of it. Now, most people would wait for the next piranha plant to go back into the pipe before jumping, but just know that you can make it across if you have the most amazing pixel perfect jumping in existence. At this point, you may be thinking, come on, the worst part so far are a couple of descending platforms. The Lost Levels doesn't seem that bad. The actual level isn't too insane if you step back and slow your tempo down, but I think that just means that the devs weren't satisfied with the amount of booty present, so they went all out on the warp pipes. Yeah, that infamous shortcut in the original that lets you pick between worlds 2 through 4 to instantly warp to. Pretty easy to get to and whatnot, right? Well, in the Lost Levels, all 3 pipes are scattered across the stage with each holding their own interesting ways to get to it. World 3's pipe is hidden through this seemingly normal brick that spurts out a vine. Getting up there is actually very easy when you have the space and momentum to leap from the pipe to the top, but of course you have to hit the brick first before climbing your way to the secret area. There is a somewhat precise jump you can make to hit the block and still be able to run from the edge of the pipe to make it up there pretty easily, but if in case you cannot do that, there's this invisible block you can hit, which I'm assuming was the intended way. The only problem is this annoying buzzy beetle on the ground that can be such a humongous pain if you accidentally set it off in this small enclosed space. All of this is assuming that you can even find out about this secret pathway in the first place. It is so tempting to see the upper bricks and try to leap onto it, especially since you can skip the majority of the level like this. And for people who played the original, that is how you got to the secret warp pipes in that game. I mean, at the very least, that was my initial thought process when playing through the stage for the first time recently. If you do trust your instincts on this, then you'll make your way to the World 2 warp pipe, which, to be fair, outside of a trickier jump to make it over the end of level pipe, is simple enough to stumble upon. But you would only be skipping like 2 levels, and that is super lame. Yeah, I feel like everyone would choose the World 4 pipe if given the option, because who actually wants to play the game that they paid for? So, where exactly is this mysterious World 4 warp pipe? Okay, get ready for this. On your way to the World 2 warp pipe, you can go down this first piranha plant pipe into the short platforming segment that leads to a pipe alongside a dead end. Going down that same pipe brings you to a somewhat dickish bonus stage, but hey, we must be getting somewhere, right? Exiting that just leads you back to the end of the normal level. Okay, so that dead end actually isn't all that dead. There's some invisible blocks that can get you over the brick wall and finally onto World 4. I feel like the game just really wants you to play through all the levels, it seems like. Which, to be fair, I mean, you probably should because they spent time coding it and whatnot. I mean, it's there for you to play, not to skip, but to each their own. Whenever I see a level like 1-3, I can't help but get a little excited. This is where that talk of momentum from earlier comes into play. A stage that lets you fly across the screen with well-timed jumps, making it feel like you're a god gamer zooming through into the flagpole. This level's design is prone to capitalize on newer players' mistakes and hesitations through a good handful of pits and tricky enemy placements. But if you keep that forward momentum going, you can bypass all of that with relative ease. Overall, not much to say, it's just a really satisfying level. By this point, hopefully the player will be much more confident with controlling Mario, and as a result can experience that amazing feeling of holding forward on the D-pad. The Lost Levels 1-3 is fairly similar to the originals in that it's a fun momentum-based stage that punishes mistakes heavily with pits and tricky enemy placements. While the game sometimes branches out and does things differently from the original, a little bit more on that later, the fact that the first world for both games shares identical level themes makes it easy to see at first glance why Nintendo of America was quick to cast the too similar judgment. Well, let me ask you, did you ever see a freaking flying blooper anywhere in the original? These airborne squids were easily the thing that caught me the most off guard concerning the first world. Not because they are an impossible hazard to get by, but just how funny and out of place they look. Even though it looks a bit funky, I'm glad that they're given a chance to be outside of the water, because their sporadic movement makes for a fun obstacle. Surely this is the weirdest the game ever gets, right? The Bowser's Castle levels, which appear at the end of every world, feel the most like obstacle courses, at least more so than the other level themes. This is due to the fact that your two main threats, the Potaboos and Fire Bars, aren't actual enemies per se. I mean, they're obviously not living things that you can stomp on or shoot fireballs at to defeat them. The Fire Bars specifically are almost seemingly spammed throughout these castle stages. But focusing on 1-4, there's a classic case of the game trying to bribe the player to interact with the first fire bar by placing a question block right above it. By the time you can land on the platform and hit the block to snag the mushroom, the fire bar will have forced you to move out of the way to avoid getting hit. Yeah, I mean, you don't need a huge 5D brain to understand how these operate, but it's a nice gesture from the game to at least try and slow down the player to show them this new obstacle. From that point, it's pretty much a straight shot to Bowser himself. I know these fights are pretty easy, especially if you're Big Mario, then it's literally the freest boss battle ever, but coming into one with Little Mario will always give me a tiny little jolt of pressure. This time around, they ditched the beginning firebar lesson in exchange for what I like to call the Lost Levels specialty. Place a power-up right above a pit of some sort. Besides that, it again has a similar feeling to the original's counterpart stage with just a bunch of firebars placed everywhere. But to be fair, like I said, that's almost any Bowser stage. After the craziness of the first two stages, at least relative to the original, I was a bit disappointed actually. I was expecting rows of Goombas, Hammer Brothers, Bullet Bills, and Piranha Plants to be around every corner. But the only actual enemy besides Bowser is this single green Koopa. Now, there is one small thing that is actually a lot trickier to avoid in the Lost Levels compared to the original, and that is Bowser's first fireball thingy. In both games, when you start to get near the Koopa King, these little fireballs start darting towards you. In the original, the first instance of this is right about here in this nice open space with plenty of room to dodge it and keep moving. The Lost Levels first fireball comes around right about here in this enclosed space with hardly any room to jump before bonking your head. I should mention that these fireballs come in, as far as I know, at random positions, so it really sucks the hardest when you have to dodge one at ground level. In this scenario, if I happen to be Big Mario, I usually just prepare myself to hold the L and fight Bowser as a tiny plumber. Yet again, I am actually a little surprised that the Bowser fight itself is virtually the same exact one as the original. I thought they would start you out at least around the original's second Bowser fight difficulty, with a row of bricks to make the jumping strategy harder to pull off. I wonder if that analysis even amounted to much. Like, why did I just spend time talking about that, and what did it prove? Well, think about this for a minute. When trying to demonstrate how difficult the Lost Levels can be, I think most people would have just shown off the hardest stages the game had to offer, and then be like, OMG, look how crazy this is. These hypothetical examples would definitely be from the last few worlds, but to me at least, that seems a bit misleading to the viewers or anyone who's never played the Lost Levels. Yeah, okay, the end of a game is hard. Isn't it supposed to be hard? To that I say yes, yes it is. 7-1 alone has Wind, Piranha Plants, Bullet Bills, Cheep Cheeps, and Hammer Brothers that continually move forward. Jeez, most onlookers would see this example and feel intimidated that they would get clapped up by this stage immediately. And it's true, they would most definitely get clapped. So why even bother focusing on stages that many casuals won't even reach? And for the people who do reach it, they would most likely be up for the challenge. I thought it was more interesting and productive to examine the few stages that every person has a nearly 100% chance of playing if they choose to pick up the sticks and attempt Mario's Lost Levels. Okay, sure, World 1 for either game doesn't have the most exciting levels to play through or talk about, but it's key to look at the beginning of the games to see how well their difficulty progression is throughout the adventure. If the Lost Levels started out somewhat tame and then rapidly got an insane difficulty spike out of nowhere, then yeah, I could see how the infamous challenge the game's identity has been stuck with would be a major issue. But to me at least, this simply isn't a problem the game faces. In fact, it seems as though both the original and the sequel follow a similar difficulty curve. While Worlds 1 through 4 do follow a gradual build-up and challenge, it was World 5 that noticeably got more difficult and then continued on with this trend across the remaining worlds up until the end. I want to clarify that when I say this, I don't mean the original and the Lost Levels offer the same exact amount of difficulty, but rather this curve reflects each game's initial World 1 difficulty and how much harder it gets from that point onwards. Obviously, the Lost Levels as an overall entirety is a much harder game, but it's safe to assume that more people would struggle completing the original's Worlds 7 and 8 versus the Lost Levels Worlds 1 and 2. We all know Super Mario Bros. 2 is a hard game. I'm not trying to put some downplay here, but I think people just call it that without actually understanding the true level of difficulty the game offers compared to the original. To be fair, I don't know the full extent of the internet's opinion on the lost levels, but I am worried that the labeling of the game in this manner could potentially turn people off from trying it out. Again, it's tougher than the original, but for the vast majority of the game, the challenge is only gradually increased, level by level, and it almost never employs cheap gameplay tactics to achieve that difficulty. If anything, I feel like Nintendo of America shouldn't have been too concerned with the difficulty, and instead just how similar the two games are. Because if you couldn't tell so far, they're a little similar.
Segment talking about how Mario Bros. And the Lost Levels are kinda sorta super similar, but is that such a bad thing? IDK, keep watching and you might find out perhaps.
According to the Mario Wiki, the overbearing similarities between the original and the Lost Levels was indeed one of the key factors in not bringing it to the West. Of course, it is too hard to tell after the fact without headcanon and speculation, but I really want to know if either the too similar or too hard factor played more into Nintendo of America's decision. Regardless, while their position on the difficulty, in my humble opinion, may have been overblown just a tad, I cannot entirely defend their other criticism of the game. Yes, the underlying gameplay of the Lost Levels is virtually the same exact thing as the originals. Like, to the point where if I showed you tiny bits and pieces of both games without telling you which one is which, it could be pretty hard telling them apart. As a direct sequel, it is to be expected that it shares many things with the first one. I mean, what, did you want them to make a sequel that has almost nothing to do with the original? Mario 3 is a perfect example of how to expand on the core gameplay of its predecessor, resulting in it having its own identity separate from not only the original, but the rest of the series, instead of just being known as the hard Mario game. Let's cut the Lost Levels a little bit of slack here, for it actually does have some new features. As I pointed out earlier, some of the enemies have been given upgrades to make them more fierce, poison mushrooms are something to look out for, the springs now send you 500 feet in the air, and everyone's favorite level gimmick, wind. Alright, so they did not actually add too many new features, but I wanted to get to the bottom of this once and for all and find out the truth. So I briefly went through and compared every world and individual level across the original and the Lost Levels to see exactly how similar these games actually are. Disclaimer, this isn't some hyper-analysis frame-by-frame judgment, rather just a overview look to see if each corresponding stage between both games features the same level theme and main obstacle. For example, a stage like 4-1 for both games has the overworld level theme, with the main obstacle being a Lakitu throwing spinies down at you. It should be absolutely hammered in your head by now, but in these cases, it just feels like the Lost Levels is a harder version of the same stage from the original. So, across both games, how many of these levels are like this? 8 of these stages had the same level theme and main obstacle. 3 of these stages had a different level theme, but the same main obstacle. 21 of the stages had no similarities in the level theme nor the main obstacle. This is not to say that there are more stages that should be highlighted green, but this was only judging them by the corresponding level number between both games. I don't know, let's say if the original's 2-1 is the same as the Lost Levels 4-2, then that's my B. Hopefully this is good enough to draw whatever conclusion you want from it. So what the heck does all of this mean? Is the Lost Levels a bad game because of the similarities it shares with the original? Well, not exactly. I think it just depends on how you look at it. Yeah, on one hand, it is in many ways a lazy sequel that Nintendo of America had justified reasonings as to not bring it to the Western markets, but on the other, more positive hand, you can look at this game as a continuation from the end of the first one. Playing them back to back and treating it as one bigger adventure really was quite the treat. If you have never attempted the Lost Levels because you may think it's too hard for you, well, I mean it might be, but it's on the Super Nintendo Online Switch service through All-Stars, so you have no excuse to at least try it out. Unless you don't have a Switch. In that case, it's fairly understandable as to why you cannot play it. In the end, it's still kinda crazy to think about how Nintendo blocked off an actual Mario game from the West because they were too worried that it would tarnish his reputation. I want to see the alternate universe where they actually did release it instead of reskinning another game with Mario sprites. Would the West have a hatred for Mario? Would Nintendo's modern day mascot be Link or Kirby? Probably not, but it's fun to imagine what kind of slippery slope Mario 2 bombing in the West would have led to. I'm still positive that Mario 3 would have come out and been an amazing sequel that everybody loves, and they would have forgotten all about the bootiness, quote-unquote, of Mario 2. Anyways, is The Lost Levels too hard and too similar to be called a good game? I don't know, make your own opinions. I mean, you saw what I had to say for the past 20-something minutes. Go and play the game yourself, and don't let somebody on YouTube control your single opinion on something, because that's not too good.